Hey, thanks for coming. You guys are part of history, the very first panel I've ever done, and this is on Nintendo Variants, and judging by the level of participation, this is about how many people know about Nintendo Variants, too, out there. But we can go right into it. I am... yeah, Kirk. This is me. I'm Divingninja on NintendoAge. Some circles, they call me Captain Variant because I get into this thing, and then I also like Marvel Comics, as you can see over there, Captain America. So, I have a wife and 4 kids. I do not work in a button factory, though. I work at Southwest Airlines, and people are like, wow, that's a lot of kids, Kirk. And the running joke now is that, yeah, I collect variants of my own kids, too. So, but I'm a collector with a complete licensed NES collection, including stadium events, as you can see. And then I also just finished 64. And through this quest, I've come across many different variants and have been starting to catalog, so we can go into them. I already said Divingninja on NintendoAge. If you see that, that's my wedding cake. Heather, my wife here, has been very, very supportive of the Nintendo addiction. And so even my wedding cake was a Nintendo with some games. This name Captain Variant came about just from a circle of friends, and they thought that it was fitting, even to the point where they started advertising for me and making things up. So a lot of the stuff I posted on Facebook and whatnot was all not by me. It was just people stole pictures off Facebook and turned it into stuff. So. Also, too, I'm a pilot, and so my name's Kirk. I often get Captain Kirk a lot, too. So, but all that wrapped into one, like the Marvel Comics. And so Captain Variant, this was my little promo on Facebook for the circle of friends. So. Anyway, okay, we'll start. What is a variant? Dictionary.com says it's a noun, a person or thing that varies. That's kind of descriptive. But correlating it to video games, it's a copy of the same game with some differences to it. And it can be like noticeable differences and very little differences. So there are numerous causes for all these variants that come out from just production run changes, game updates in the game itself, and then just rebranding or releasing, etc. So how did I get into variants? So when I started, I was a kid, and I was like, you know what? When I get older, my twin brother and my cousin and I, we're all going to live in the same big house, and we're going to have every single original Nintendo game. And don't want to live in the same house with those guys anymore, but do have every single original Nintendo game. And so through that hunt, that collection, I started getting doubles because I would buy lots. I'd take the doubles and I'd look at them side by side and I'd say, okay, which one's better, which one am I keeping in my collection? And through that process, I kind of learned that, hey, this one has a different seal than this one over here. And I didn't know which one was better, which one was more sought after, and I started to do some research, and I really couldn't find much info. And also at that point, too, I was getting towards the end of collecting NES, and there wasn't much to find, and it was a lot of work for a little return on the collection. So what I decided to do was contribute to the community, and I would put together some lists like this and then share, and then maybe eventually a bunch of people would be like me and start collecting variants. So why should you collect variants? Well, again, like I was talking earlier, it adds to your hunt. You could be looking for things, and every day at your local game store you could pass it up, but it very well could have been something that's pretty sought after. Also, too, if you have multiple copies of the same game, it's good for backups. Also, through variants, I've kind of realized a pattern on things, and if you are going complete in box, you might notice that some of your copies of your original games might not be the same box and manual that went with it originally. Maybe you bought it from a game store and they pieced it together. So, just good to know what you have. And then you definitely want to collect to trade and sell them to me, because I'm always looking for variants. But the point I put up there is, you can, even if you don't care about them, if you're out looking and you notice them, you can pick them up and you might be able to help someone else and maybe make some money on the side. Or trade for something you need for your regular collection. Is that a question there, Mr. Yod?
Well, the question I have is, if they change the boxes or the actual variant, like as far as the game any different? I mean, is it upgraded with the variant also or not?
I'm going to say possibly. It just really depends on what the variant is and what the change was. Some of them were changes that were required by Nintendo, the company, and so they didn't really have to change the game. They just changed the look of the label. And some of them were, they had to change the copy of the cartridge because there was a glitch, and so they came out with a code revision, and it fixes bugs. Yep. So yeah, of course you want the one with the glitches fixed, right? So, anyway, so do variants command a premium? Yes and no. It depends. Some are really expensive because a lot of people are looking for a certain subset, but most of them are not, just because people have their hands full just collecting one copy of all the games they want. And right now, as you can see, there's not much exposure to this, but it's all in supply and demand. So as more and more people find out about this type of stuff, more and more people will probably be wanting to collect different things. So today, plan on talking about games only, because manuals and boxes and all that jazz would probably be Variants Class 201, and this is Variants 101. But for the cartridges of NES, SNES, and N64 are what we'll talk about, and then also GameCube, there are slight variances sometimes to the disc, but I run into a situation where I don't like collecting variants of things that could be changed easily. So like at your game store, if GameStop takes all their disc out of the case, and they put them all in a row, and then they pick out a different one that might not have gone in that same case, you don't know, is it truly a variant, or did they just mess up like that? So on the GameCube, we'll just talk about the variants on the boxes. And then not really going to go through complete list in this presentation because I'm sure you guys need to go home tonight, but we'll just talk about kind of categories and, oh yeah, I put some are undiscovered still, so I can't go through a complete list. And then I will provide some resources and links and stuff if you want to follow up. I can collect email addresses and things too, and we'll send you the presentation. So, all right, let's play a game. Anyone ready to spot that variant? Zelda, everyone loves Zelda, right? Can anyone tell me on the screen here if they know what the variant is between these two cartridges? You got it? The bottom right. It's kind of hard to see, but there's nothing there. No, yeah, that's not it. What wife? Do you know?
No, I said, I do know, because I know
Oh, no. Both of these look exactly the same, except we'll give you a little help. Up in the top right corner by Nintendo Entertainment System, there's a little TM by it, and then later one had a little R. These little things that you can't really even tell at first view, I mean, if you really are paying attention to them, this is the level of detail that I've gotten into. So crazy, right? With the original Nintendo Entertainment System, NintendoAge has it set at 768 total games, licensed and unlicensed, and I've just been tracking kind of things that I've come across, and just variants, I've come up with 853 so far. I got a link to my collection tool in NintendoAge if you want to just see what I'm missing, you could help me out, or if you want to just see what you may have of the lot. And yeah, I put a little note here, let me know if I'm missing any. If you have one that I don't have on my list, let me know, because right now I'm just a captain. Maybe one day I'll be general variant, but we'll wait for that. There is a guy on NintendoAge as well that I've learned has gone even further than me, and he's collected all the boxes and things, and pretty much has like every single known thing, but he's pretty protective of his information. So breaking down NES into some categories, there's the 5-screw and 3-screw, which it has to do with the actual shell that was put together. There are major variants, which was like the question you asked about the code revisions. And then obviously the little label variants and seal variants, and like kind of the thing I showed you with Zelda. And then also even unlicensed games still had the variants because a lot of those had different copies as well. And just a caveat or disclaimer, if you will, I am not tracking back label variants because lots of people can take backs off and swap them, and you never know what you're going to get. So, all right. Oh, it's a little off screen, but NES 5-screw versus 3-screw. So original Nintendo, they had the production run where they take 2 pieces of plastic, slap them together, drill 5 screws in the back, and that was a 5-screw game. Later they figured that they could save 2 screws worth for every Nintendo game if they just molded the plastic differently so it kind of fit together like a shell, and then they just screw 3 pieces of plastic in. So if you notice on the top picture there, the 2 extra screws at the top versus the ones at the bottom. So there's been a lot of debate on what is a legitimate 5-screw and what is like potentially a piece together 5-screw, because everyone can make what they want now, kind of, sort of. But through all the research, I consider there to be 82 specific, legitimate, and intended games that had that 5-screw shell. And then of those 5-screw games, some of them, that was all that they made. And then later, 74 of them got the new production run style of the 3-screw counterpart. So in addition to this, there have been those rare 5 and 3-screw variants that have been discovered, and some of those I would argue, okay, it might have been, they sent it into the Nintendo repair facility, they didn't have the right parts, so they just Frankensteined it back together, and it does like exist from Nintendo. But others, there seems to be some patterns that have emerged through looking at all this. So if you notice, I did those 5-screw Mega Man and 5-screw Punch Out are ones that people are really sought after and paying lots of money for. But through, I guess, the research and stuff, we kind of figured out that it's possible that those copies are not really, I guess, what I would consider part of the legitimate 82. And the only reason, because if you look, I've got a copy and on the back label, and everyone I've seen their copy also, it has a little Rev A by the caution sign on the back label. And Rev A was Nintendo's code to say that this is a 3-screw cartridge. So being that that has spots for 5 screws on the back, and the label itself had the Rev A on it, leads you to believe that it was kind of Frankenstein together, where they had an extra lot of 5-screw carts in their factory and just threw them in and sent them out. So, all right. And then, last but not least, on there is the Konami Ultra out of timeline 5 screws. There's a subset. I have some copies up here that you can see, and these are really, really hard to find because it appears that only like at most 5 copies of each game was released, and I can talk more about that later, but yeah, a lot of people don't even know about those. So, yeah, here we go. There's a kind of picture of games that you would normally not notice that were truly 5-screw, but they all followed the same pattern where all these games came out after the time of the 3-screw revision, and all Nintendo games were standardized to the 3-screw. But what's weird about these games too is they were put together with the security bits on the back instead of the normal flathead screwdriver. So they seem like they were intended from these companies, and they also did not have the caution label in the back. So to me that kind of signified that maybe they were potentially like the not for resale copies, or even just test copies of those games that were sent out before the actual release. Okay, code revisions that he was interested in over here. So each game has its own specific 2-letter code. You see Metroid up here has the MT as its 2-letter code. And they started, at the very first runs, they didn't have that code on the games, but later they started putting them on there. And then, so if you had a major revision to the game, they would add like a -1 or -2 to the end of the code. So when Metroid's label changed from that original gray label to the new look, you can see on the bottom under the seal it had a little -1 by it. So these codes also could go with or without the boxes. Sometimes they needed to make a revision to the manual because they didn't talk about epilepsy. And then they decided, okay, we'll add that in there, and then the manual had a -1 code revision. So more on just label variants. You can see the copies of Metroid at the top, the different labels they had out there. Same game, maybe with some little revisions to fix glitches, but some labels are more one of a kind, like Upside Down Top Gun. There are a couple of those that have surfaced that are the Upside Down labels, but again, there's really, I haven't seen 2 of the same copies, so that was probably a fix later in the timeline. And then we have the more mass-produced variants that everyone can start to collect, and everyone can potentially get a copy that had just the changes to their codes or changes with this, even the seal of quality going from the circle to the oval. So going more into the seal of quality here, you can see originally this Zelda game was produced with the circle seal of quality, and then later it came out in the oval seal. And while they were producing the oval seal, they didn't have the registered yet, so it had a little TM by the oval, and then later it did come out with the R. And someone was asking me earlier, why did they change from a circle to an oval? I don't know, maybe someone in marketing wanted to make their name, or it's possible that if counterfeit people were trying to make a circle, it's a lot easier to make a circle than it is a specific oval shape. So, okay. So, and then also all these slides, I have links to like my list if you want to go in there and check it out and see what you have compared to what other unlicensed Nintendo variants. So we have, this is all Bible adventures, and there are some games that you look at the copy and you can't really tell if it's a variant or not to what you have. The only way you can tell is if you ask the person at the store or whoever has it to put it in your Nintendo so that you can see what version number pops up on the front screen. A lot of the Wisdom Tree games were like that, and so see, I've kind of tried to label it, okay, that's version 1.2, 1.3, and so on. So, oh yeah, I thought this was going to be fun. Little black and blue, little trippy. So yeah, going through this, like at most copies of the same game I've come up with on an NES is 8 of the same game. I'm missing one for Zelda, and then also like Metroid there. You can see the 8 copies of that. But just knowing these different types of variants, you can hold 2 cartridges side by side and kind of tell, I know for a fact that this one came out before this one. So just the timeline of when it was produced on the production line too. So yeah, here's an example of my list of Zelda and how much detail you have to include to make sure you capture every variant and what type it is. Going from the 5 screw at the top, then 3 screw, and then there was no Made in Japan, and then they added Made in Japan. There was no code on it, then they added the code, and then they got their circle seal to oval seal, and then with the TMs and the Rs, it started changing things. So just kind of to show the example, this was the very first picture you saw with the TM at the top up there, then it turned to an R, and both of those are 5 screw. You can see the flat top, and then it turned to the 3 screw at the top up there, and then they added Made in Japan. The one I'm missing is the one right here where it has no made in Japan, but then they added Made in Japan. Then they added the code. Then they turned it to the oval seal with the TM, then an oval seal with an R. Then they rebranded it to the gray cartridge. And you got the -1 code. And so that was the variants of Zelda. So try to be quicker with Super Nintendo because I do not have a complete collection of Super Nintendo, so I don't know as much of what I'm talking about. But I know enough of what to collect. A lot of Super Nintendo, N64, and GameCube, since it wasn't my first system. I've seen more variants on NintendoAge, and I'm gonna give credit to those guys as well. So, Super Nintendo, they have 726 licensed and unlicensed according to NintendoAge, and so far I'm showing there's potential to 345 variant cartridges at least, and I'm collecting them with the different categories here of kind of like the same thing with the 5 screw and 3 screw. Super Nintendo had a boxier shell and then one with little sunken end part. They had the major variants with the code revisions as well, and then obviously little label variances that came with that. And then Super Nintendo's first time we got those Player's Choice copies. I guess arguably you could say the red label on the NES was the Player's Choice, but we have the specific Player's Choice name now for Super, and then finally we've got the Not for Resale cartridges on Super as well. So without a lot of description, and since you guys kind of know now the categories that I talked about on the NES, we'll just kind of show some pictures here. The boxier shell, you can see how it kind of sticks out, and then the sunken end, it goes in. And there, on that front page on the Super, there was that list of which is which, so you can find, and that list is pretty complete from as far as I know. And then again, the code revisions, you can see Dash USA on the first Super Mario World, and then it had the different look where they stacked the name, and they had the -1. Other little label variants, the assembled in Mexico on the X-Men game over there. There's a lot of them that games, they were trying to make them cheaper, and so a lot of times they started out made in Japan, and to bring the production cost down, they started farming out the work to Mexico, and the title of a company down there was Majesco, and generally those copies of the games had that assembled in Mexico. It had the label kind of printed on the plastic, so they didn't have to have that extra step. And also, if you notice, some of the Super Nintendo manuals had the color version and then the black and white version. The black and white version were the ones that were from Mexico and the cheaper production costs versus the color ones that were the made in Japan. And then even on top of after that, They had a bunch of leftover stock down in Mexico, and they didn't have the labels on them yet. And I guess they were trying to dump them for bulk, and they sold them to some guy, I think up in the Northeast, that ended up just putting these simple little sticker labels on them, like this Jungle Strike here, which at first I thought was a prototype. I thought I was going to be awesome, but then later it turned out to just be leftover stock from a production run in Mexico. So then player's choice, and I put this up here to even show, even just within player's choice, you have multiple copies of variants, because this player's choice at the top right was made in Mexico, and it's got a -1 code, but then you got a made in Japan -2 code, and then a made in Mexico -2 code. So all those player's choice, but still variants of each other, so I gotta catch them all. And then the not for resale, I only have a couple here, but those are kind of obvious to spot with the big not for resale word on them. And then on the back, a lot of them had this sticker for which store it was in and whatnot. Nintendo 64. So they pretty much ironed out all their production changes and kinks by the time they got to Nintendo 64. And so there were not very many variants to Nintendo 64. The game count in general is low, 296 just on the whole set. And a lot of people go after this one because it's the more reasonably priced, and also it seemed like pretty well distributed amount of cartridges out there for both. So the variant categories, they had the color variants. There were 14. We'll go more into that later, but that were specific, that had both colors. They also had a very few of the major variant code revisions, but most of those were associated with the player's choice. And then they did have the not for resale cartridges that came in the kiosk, and then there were these other minor variants that are not very many of them. There's like a couple copies of each. So color cartridges. So 42 of the 296 N64 cartridges were released in color. And before I get more into this, this is a lot of this info is stuff I've obtained from NintendoAge, and I just want to give props and credit to the guy on there named Nintendo Twizzer, who had done an article in the e-zine that's our NintendoAge supposedly monthly publication. But yeah, so of those 42 that were made in color, 13 of them, including Turok Rage Wars, which was like a newer one that they had backstock on, were released to the public in both of the shells, and this kind of got a little rarity list of how hard it is to find the color, or the gray cartridge, over on the right. Major variants. So, as I said earlier, most of these go hand in hand with the player's choice. Sorry, I did not have a better copy of Smash Brothers, but you can see that even some of the major variants, like that one up there, is a -1, but it wasn't player's choice. And then when they finally went to the player's choice, it's a -2. But then there were some that weren't player's choice that also had a code revision, like that Golden Nugget, which is probably one no one even cares about. Some more with the player's choice. You can see Mario Kart 64 is regular, then it went to the player's choice with the -1, and then even player's choice with the -2. Not for resale on Nintendo 64. There are good resources out there for a lot of Nintendo 64 stuff, since it does have a pretty big fan base. But this guy on YouTube called Alec Kermit, he is pretty good on old variants on N64. So I threw up a picture of his not for resale collection, because it's much more complete than mine. And so these were the ones used in kiosk. And a lot of them did have that same sticker on the back like the Super Nintendo. So these other minor variants, some things that could be very small, other than the player's choice and the code revision. If you can see on the Mario Karts, there's a E on the rating system and a KA. Excuse me. So that didn't happen too often, but it did happen. And then you can notice on the Zelda from the gold cartridge collector's edition on to the player's choice. The player's choice had the E colored in black. So Zelda is kind of interesting because a lot of people like Zelda. So a lot more research has been done about Zelda. So on the back of the shell of the Zelda carts, and it's really hard to see. It took forever to take these pictures, but like this at the bottom of the gold cartridge, it says 07A. There's a no letter, an A, and a B. and those signified the version numbers of Zelda that you were getting, like 1.0, 1.1, or 1.2. And I think version 1.0 and 1.1, when you slashed Ganon there, you got the blood in red, but version 1.2, it turned green. So if you really want the red blood, make sure you get an earlier version. But the middle copy, you might not be able to tell just from the front, but the back will tell you which version you're getting of the three in the middle. And then all the player's choice copies did have the version 1.2. So, GameCube. I kind of like GameCube. It's like a DVD collection almost. It's all complete normally when you get it. You don't really get too many loose copies of GameCube. But it's a 559 set count supposedly on NintendoAge, and a lot of research again by that same guy, Nintendo Twizzler, for the variants on GameCube. So adding up all the different categories of GameCube variants, you can get up to 102 more copies for the collection. The different choices, the player's choice. There's a bestseller badge, so on top of player's choice, they wanted to rebrand it to bestseller. And then there were the other box variants, like Kmart covers, movie tickets, split covers, random cover case things, and then they also had a couple not for resale, and then customized oversized boxes. So player's choice. We're gonna go fast. There's 107 confirmed player's choice copies. Go get them. So bestseller badge. If you notice, all these have that oval kind of seal that says bestseller, and I guess it was to help signify for those parents that were going in to get their kids a Christmas gift, which one do the kids like nowadays. So they throw it up there so the parents could keep buying them. So of that, I think that might be all 17 of them right there in that picture. They had the Kmart exclusives. A lot of times Kmart would rebrand and put on top of the game, they'd add like the Wavebird controller to different copies, player's guides, and things like that. So you'll notice that some of the copies of these games have that actually on the label of the case. So, movie tickets. So I'm in the store all the time checking for the movie ticket cover, and if it has it in there, then I gotta check to see if it has the actual movie ticket still in it. Sure, you can't go watch the movie now, but it's still kind of cool to have that old school movie ticket. Most of them, it's really easy to tell because it's just a loose ticket in there, but some of them, I think like the Harry Potter, it was actually printed in the manual, so most people didn't even see it or care about it, so you see that one more often than not. But yeah, I like to collect all the little pieces in there as well. And so yeah, I've got to have the regular copy and the variant copy. The GameCube other box variants with the split cover. It's, as you can see, like 2 copies of the same game rolled into one. Some of these, like the Metroid and the Wind Waker, are really expensive now and really hard to find. Some of these, they only came out in the GameCube bundle set that had those games paired together. So low production run towards the end, and now it's very sought after and expensive. These are kind of some, we'll flash up some pictures of some other box variants from little things like just more advertisement to just talking about the bonuses and things included. On the Freestyle, you can see it has a little Blockbuster symbol underneath his shoe there. There was a couple Target exclusives. You had the Mario Kart with the 2-disc, that bonus disc. The Activision label changed on the Matt Hoffman. You can tell the 10 games in one's not there on Mega Man, and another little bonus. So all these little things that changed, a Napster, little label there, and all these different cartridges. You had some special editions that came out, like Resident Evil, that GameStop Hard Edition. Some of them came from like a big box of the Resident Evils for the. In that big box, I think they had the Not for Resale on the back of them too. Yeah, there's tons of these things. And Star Wars had a couple changes on that. Okay, Not for Resale. This is cool because you can walk around and even vendors probably don't know what they've got sometimes on these Not for Resales. Because the only way you can kind of tell if it's a Not for Resale is if you look at the back on a lot of these copies of these boxes. Now these Not for Resale games were the ones usually packed in with the GameCube itself. So like there was a Mario Kart GameCube set, and within that set you got this copy of that game. So if you have that copy in your game as your regular copy in that game, that might be more valuable to someone that's trying to complete their box set with the Mario Kart. So, and then these are just a couple examples of the big box versions. Like when they sold them, like Mario Mix on Dance Dance Revolution, you got that pad with it, and all the copies of that say not for resale on the back. So all copies of that came in that big box originally. So if you're going for complete, you gotta get all these pieces. So that kind of wraps up. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing about all that information, but from right now, I would like to give everyone the opportunity to win a game for coming. I thought there were going to be a few more people, but I will give a hint that no one is sitting in a seat with something under it on this side of the room if someone wants to go search. It might be behind Leo right there if anyone wants to go grab something from under that seat. No, behind your dad. Yeah. He has not played this game before. Right behind the seat he was sitting in. You were sitting in. It's there. You can come into the front, and we'll go ahead and get to the. Okay, cool. So this little giveaway is a copy of Athletic World. One of these things that was interesting. Everyone knows stadium events in this story, and if not, I'll recap real fast. But yeah, good job, man. Here's a copy of Athletic World. So stadium events was a good idea that Nintendo wanted, and so they bought the rights, pulled the Bandai copy of stadium events off the shelf, but it was technically released to the public, so that's technically one of the games you need for the complete set, and is now very well sought after. So stadium events was Series 2 within this Bandai series that they were going to do, and Athletic World was actually Series 1. So Athletic World also came out with its 5-screw version with the circle seal, and it had this specific label with Series 1 on it. So later in the production line, after they pulled stadium events off the shelf, they had to pull new copies of Athletic World off the shelf as well, and they did change that into a different look for the box and the label. So with that, the original copy of Athletic World is starting to become more sought after as people know that story. And I guess also too, the original box that came out is getting pretty expensive itself. It came out also too more on boxes potentially later in a different panel, but they had that hang tab on some of the earlier releases, and so if you have one of these, it could be upwards to $400 on you. So, but yeah, then Athletic World came out with a rebrand, and they had an oval seal. And again, with the seal change, Ryder, this might look familiar to you. This is one of the games I got from him that he hooked me up on. I didn't realize they did this, but in the stores when the games were still sealed, when Nintendo had their directive, though we're changing to the oval seal, existing copies of games with the cellophane on them potentially got a sticker of Nintendo seal put over the cellophane onto the oval. I mean, sorry. The oval sticker got on top of the circle seal. So it's very interesting because most people that got these ripped it apart and there went the sticker down the trash, but one was saved. Thank you, sir. So that's Athletic World for you, and then I guess I will open it up to questions. I don't know what my time is because I wasn't paying attention, but I can talk about variants for days. Does anyone have anything? Anyone wanted to?
Was there a variant of a not for resale for Pokemon XD?
So Pokemon XD on GameCube, yes. It also was one of the subcategories that did have a not for resale title because they did have that specific branded Pokemon XD GameCube, and that did come with a copy of it in there. So yeah, anytime you're out looking for those copies of games, make sure you check for that not for resale on the back of the cover, or some of them did have it on the front of the cover. So yes, to answer your question, yes. So cool. What was the time? Does anyone keeping track? 12:10? Yes, sir.
The Toronto Brady Wars for the 64.
Yes.
The second edition, did they release that to the public or no?
So, mixed feelings on that. From all the research I've done, it was something that they were getting ready to like release out to the public, and like if you had the glitch, you could send your game in and then get a replacement copy, and this replacement copy was that gray one. But recently, I think within the past year or two, someone came across all their backstock that they were holding to send out, and so a lot of those did get out into the public, and so now it is slightly more common, but it still commands a premium out there. So cool. I am a wealth of knowledge, and we'll have these resources available. I don't know if maybe, I know some of the guys that ran the event, so we might be able to throw up a link maybe to this on YouTube, or even just a way to get a hold of me if you have any other questions along the line. So thank you guys for making history and coming to my very first ever panel. Hopefully you will be at more in the future. So appreciate it, guys.